Cracks are forming in the used car market, and we also see it, Dad, happening in the finance market. We did a live stream about this on Saturday night. We know those can get quite lengthy. We did it with Car Questions Answered, actually. Brandon, go check out his channel. American Car Center, Dad. They are a dealership group that typically services folks that have subprime credit. Unfortunate circumstance. They closed their doors on Friday of last week. 300 employees without a job, which is terrible.
Yes.
And also hundreds of vehicles in inventory that now are going to get liquidated. And also they ultimately made this decision after they couldn't get bonds sold that were backed by their loan portfolio, $220 million that they couldn't get their hands on. So they closed their doors. That story is potentially the first of many dominoes to fall. We looked at Carvana earnings and others. Like, there's a lot of not money making happening right now.
We looked at Carvana's losses. Carvana doesn't have earnings.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very fair. So why are we saying cracks might be forming in the used car market? Because if you start to look at delinquency rate trends, Dad, and let's start here, actually. Let's look first at overall delinquency rates, 90 plus days delinquent. And what you're looking at on this chart might be a little bit blurry on the screen, but what you're looking at is overall delinquency rates. And you can see in 09, 2010, 2011, 2012, there was a significant spike.
I think there was something called the Great Recession.
Yeah, the global financial crisis, right?
Yes.
And then delinquency rates went down.
Yes.
And now delinquency rates are going back up. And so you have consumers who purchase these very expensive used cars. You don't have to look too far. Go watch some of our videos from a year ago. Used car prices were going way up, starting to go delinquent.
Yes.
How does that tie back to American Car Center? Well, they couldn't get their $220 million worth of bonds because they were trying to securitize them, say, hey, we'll make good on these payments back to you who issued the money for the bond, because we have these loans that are, people are going to pay on these. Well, the delinquency rates on those loans must have been 20, 25%, so no one would buy the bonds. Is this not an indication, Dad, that the house of cards has fallen down just a little bit? Pops, did you hear the good news?
I did. Abe Lincoln said we should save people 30% if they sign up for CarEdge Coach. That's 30% off through the end of February.
Use the code CarEdge Coach at caredge.com/plans.
Well, I would suggest the house of cards isn't nearly as stable as you would like a house of cards to be. And let's face it, a house of cards is never very stable. But a house of cards can appear more stable than it is, and this is an indication that house of cards is less stable than we'd like it to be. You can start looking at delinquency rates going up. You can start looking at banks making determinations not to repossess cars because they finance so much money on those cars that they know if they were to take them to the auction that the losses on those vehicles would be so substantial that they'd rather try and figure out ways to delay having to repossess them and just take partial payments if they have to or whatever from those customers because it'll absolutely destroy their portfolios.
There's three leading indicators of what's happening. Delinquency rates.
Yes.
So what percentage of consumers are delinquent on their auto loan?
Yes.
There are loan loss provisions, the amount of money set aside by financial institutions for expected loan losses. We were looking at Credit Acceptance Corporation, which is similar to American Car Center in the sense that they service a subprime credit tier. Year over year, their loan loss provision amount went up 5,600%. That is not a typo. That is not a misstatement. 5,600% year over year. That is a big swing, to say the least. And the third would be the repossession rate. So at what rate are the banks actually repoing the vehicles? And an interesting dichotomy we have here is that we're seeing loan loss provisions go up, delinquency rates go up, but repo rates go down. Because the consumer might be $10,000, $20,000 underwater on the vehicle. The bank doesn't want to be $10,000, $20,000.
Well, that means the bank is $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 underwater on the loan because they financed way too much for the consumer to start with. And they don't want that to come home to roost. So they're delaying repossessing these vehicles as long as they possibly can, giving people who are delinquent as much time as they possibly can to try and get them caught up. The loan losses on those type of vehicles would be astronomical. And the consumer, you could actually end up suing them for the delinquency balance, but hell, if they couldn't pay the main balance, they're not ever going to be able to pay that delinquency balance. Let's just face facts.
Yeah.
So Yeah, the banks understand the situation they find themselves
Absolutely.
in, which is why they're adjusting their loan loss provisions. Yeah, we're not even though sales are up, we're not in a really strong position.
No, and the we being the industry.
The industry.
Consumers, those of you who are sitting on the sidelines with cash, do we still think it's going to get better for you? Let's look at the financial, I'm going to call it the financial, I can't say crisis, but the financial issues broken down by a few dimensions. Transition into serious delinquency, 90 plus days for auto loans by age.
Yes.
That, okay, 18 to 29-year-olds traditionally have the highest delinquency rate. That makes sense. You've got to think that part of this is influenced by the push towards flex culture. Like, I've got to have the latest and greatest car. We've seen the share of luxury vehicle sales go through the roof. Young people trying to extend themselves on terms to drive something fancy. Well, we're seeing delinquency rates go up. 30 to 39-year-olds next after
maybe
that.
because they don't understand it as well as they should. They haven't had enough experience with credit to understand how all this can influence things moving forward.
Yep. Also, if we look by region, Dad, Texas. Delinquency rates in Texas are significantly higher than the U.S. average. And unfortunately, in the South in general, that is true. Delinquency rates in the South are higher than in other places in the United States. And this also, we don't have the data pulled up, but obviously broken down by credit tier is another dimension as well. Those who have more subprime credit, the average delinquency rate there is north of 20%.
One of the things that we should look at, and I don't know if we can pull it up, is how much has credit card debt increased for Americans over the past 15 to 18 months. My suspicion is it's significant. People are utilizing their credit cards in order to get by on a daily basis. So those are the type of indicators that would suggest that we're in a much deeper financial crisis than we're being led to believe.